Okay, well, listen, welcome back to the Cash and Common podcast. This is episode 4. We're coming along here, humming along. We want to make, we want to continue to provide some value and give you guys some information on mortgages, cash management, cash flow, legal knowledge, and we want to just talk, a little bit about we want to start to go broader and some broader topics, but tie it back to all of those issues that we usually talk about. So, when I first, Rob, when you first came in here, we were talking a little bit about one of the articles I read. I read it on a blog that has a decent reputation, but depending on who you ask, you might think that blog is not so credible. And so we just want to talk. We want to touch on a couple things. Like I think we should talk about fraud, because a lot of the news recently has been sort of this has been pervading in the news, this idea of fraud. Is that even the word, pervading? I'm not sure I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's pervasive sort of news articles on this topic, right? So, and again, my name's Ryan Martin. We got Roberto Palaccia here, and we hope we can provide you guys with some interesting interesting conversation. So thanks for listening. So fraud cases in the news. I'll tell you, Rob, I was at this event on Saturday, and there was a few people did approach me on the issue of fraud. What I would say is there was one specific person that was so worried about it.
Oh, for sure.
That she wanted me to give her an answer for how you could prevent that kind of thing from happening. So just so everybody understands what we're talking about, we're seeing here that a lot of people are somehow all of a sudden bumping into a situation where their property is no longer in their name. It just sort of happens. They go search their title for their property, and the property's transferred out of their name. How does this happen? People wonder, right? So how does this happen?
Yeah, I can only imagine there must have been cases where people are like literally trying to move in.
For sure.
Right? Showed up with like a moving truck, and you must be standing on your porch saying, what are you doing here, right?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit interesting. Who are these people? So we could touch on a little bit how this kind of fraud happens, how it materializes. One of the interesting ways in which it happens, is tenants. So you could have tenants in a property. They know you pretty well. They may collect your mail, and if they collect your mail, then you know that they have some information on you. They could illegally open your mail, which we know is everybody knows that's a serious thing to do, and it's a serious wrong. But that serious wrong can turn into like a major fraud, because they can collect information. Imagine a credit card ends up at your house. Now they've opened a credit card. That credit card has information. It's tied. It gives you credibility. If they now tried to pretend to be you, they could say, well, I've got a credit card, and this is who I am.
They could try to attempt to change their ID to your name. Yeah. So their picture now is on your face, which is the only way I could think these people got away with doing this, because it seems like it's a crime ring that's happening, because it's so relevant right now. It's happening a lot. Like I heard it was something like 32 cases in the last 12 months. Yeah. In Toronto alone, where people are finding out their house was sold by someone else. Yeah. Which seems almost impossible, but I mean, they have to have, because there's safeguards, right? So they have to have ways to work around those safeguards. And I can only imagine that they have really awesome fake ID. And they're obviously I think they're cherry picking these places as well. Because they have to know who they could probably get away with this the most. Usually they are homes that are paid off. Like that's super common.
Yeah. Well, that's I guess we'll jump into that. Yeah. And about how mortgages could help solve the problem. But what I would say is this, I think a big part of the reason we're seeing a rise in the circumstances with respect to this is you've got verification of ID happening in a different way than it happened pre-COVID, right? Pre-COVID, we know that somebody comes into my office, I get to look at them. Maybe, they consider the possibility of running a fraud, but they kind of it's a stopgap or a mechanism that sort of stops people when they know they've got to come in front of a person, to verify an ID. That isn't happening anymore, pretty much. The Law Society is in the process of, or has been very resistant to this process of IDing people virtually. So there is some pushback now. The Law Society in 2024 is saying, we are going to move away from that. The only way in which you can do that is still to get a third party to verify. And again, we'll have to go back and check this, but get a third party to verify that ID. So in other words, pull a credit bureau report.
Okay.
Pull a bunch of information. So in order for you to do that, you've really got to drill down on the person. You got to tell me more about that, to be honest. But they basically want extra scrutiny happening for this individual, which makes a lot of sense. If we're not going to go straight back to people insistence on people coming into the office, well, we've got to build in some other mechanisms to say, okay, well, now we've really verified this person's ID. And so,
well, it's just it's a business model now too, right? Like, I mean, how often are you meeting people? You're saying not often anymore, and
never.
And I think that's almost an expectation. I have more people asking how to do things faster and easier than let's get together and sit down. And the process has changed, I think, in business in general, in a lot of these types of services where it's just done over the phone, over Zoom. And, I think we've got to that stage where people are okay with that.
Yeah.
It's more of an expectation. I know it's a generational thing too. Obviously, the younger you are, the more accepting you are of doing things using technology versus, being older and doing things more traditionally over across a desk, right?
And it's like that kind of it's interesting because you don't want to resist the ability for us to move forward with technology. It's important that we say, okay.
Oh, it saves loads of time and energy.
I don't know. When was the last time you had a person in your office? Like, have you ever? Like, I don't even know. Like, were you even doing that before? I feel like it wasn't even happening before that much.
Yeah, no. So I have to admit, it was probably pre-COVID 50-50. There would be. I was more of a mobile broker. I'd visit people closer to their homes. And what's happened now is that's been completely eliminated. Yeah, like I don't do that at all anymore. Yeah. We have everything is set up. The technology's there. So I find it really interesting that someone can go through an entire process, all the chains and the links of buying a home. And I can only think that there was a bit of ability to get away with a little more because you didn't have to actually see anyone face to face.
Yeah.
Because I think that takes a lot more nerve as well.
True.
Right? Let's be honest, right? Like it's easier to kind of lie over the phone or over a Zoom call. But if you have to stand in front of that realtor, that lawyer, that loan officer, I think that takes a lot more nerve and it takes a lot more courage if you're going to go that far. So I think that may be part of it as well.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I mean, I think that I hear the Law Society's concerns there. I'm very, I think that we sort of as a law firm think about optimization so much, so concerned with the transaction going smoothly, getting technology on board to make sure that happens. The problem with technology, I think, and maybe we need somebody who's an expert in technology, but you really start to see that there are components of technology that can help you, but you need other components to catch up to make it really optimized, right? So in other words, right now, for sure, we can have Zoom, we can be on there, we can talk to a person through there, but document verification, there's a little bit of a gap because there's not really a document system that can do that. And I know that there's a crypto guys out there saying if we just shift over to blockchain or crypto, we would have a more secure method of doing it. There are problems with that right now, and getting people to see that as the main method is becoming quite challenging. But what I would say is, that's sort of what we need to see is we need an AI mechanism for verifying someone's ID, right? If I have an AI method that is blockchained, quote unquote,
sure,
possibly we would be in a place where this problem starts to disappear. But for now, if we're going to continue to verify ID, you and me verifying ID, like, okay, we know that there are certain checks, but somebody who's created a pretty good fraudulent ID is going to get past, right? It'll get past a slew of people, banks, you, me, which is usually the last line of defense, right? The lawyer is sort of the check this over, make sure that everybody kind of was on board. And, you know, we have a lot of stringent requirements, but as a human, I mean, we're getting to a place with printing things and pictures and that kind of stuff. It's really hard to tell. You know?
Yeah, like there's a website, a Ministry of Transportation or some Ontario website where you can actually punch in someone's ID number, their driver's license number, and it can verify if that's correct, and it'll tell you who that is on the other end of that. So, I mean, but the thing is, you know, I feel like if these people are going through the process entirely, I feel like they went the extra mile. Like whatever they did, they really had to take over this person's identity. That's my gut feeling. Or, you know, I think another part of this is, you know, could have been a bit of an inside job, you know, like how does this happen 30 times? I just find it kind of shocking. Like,
yeah,
I know, like I know the sort of condition list that you have, and then you know the condition list that we have.
You have the FISCO list, right? Or
you know, we have to really, you know, identify people in different manners. I mean, documentation is very stringent, and then on top of that, you know, people's credit bureaus have a lot of history on them. So I just feel like, you know, when we, you know, take in an application, for example, for a mortgage, you know, we want to know where you worked for the last 3 years, where you lived for the last 3 years. Like there are a lot of detailed information. And oftentimes a lot of that information is being backed up by documentation as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, like we need a mortgage statement, a property tax bill, like, you know, pay stubs, employment letters. A lot of things go towards getting your loan approval. So I just feel like I feel like they were pinpointing circumstances. There must be a little gap in the system where these guys just found a very intelligent way to break through. Yeah. And you know what they say about criminals, like they're the ones on the leading edge of this, right? They push and find out what they could get away with.
Sure.
So I mean, I think what will happen from here is that there's going to be more legislation. You know, I'd love to see technology get there. I mean, who knows, you know, how that comes about. I'm sure it'll come sooner rather than later, but they're definitely going to try to prevent this because it's such shocking news. Like, you know,
well, that's the thing.
Like, you know how tragic that must feel, like, you know, sitting in your home knowing that technically someone else owns it right now. And actually go into like what happens, like, right? Like when that happens from a legal standpoint, you know, like if my house was suddenly sold and I call you, because I would call you, be like, hey man, someone showed up here with a movie truck saying they own my home. You know, like what does that look like afterwards?
Well, I mean, man, it's a really tricky thing to untangle. And you know, before I answer though, what I would say is this. I mean, I think you're right about loan documents and loan checking, right? I mean, we're talking, you know, you raised this issue before we started the podcast, that it's likely, if you think about it, it's going to short circuit that whole process for you to have a mortgage that you need to get, or if there's a mortgage on title that's already been obtained. A lawyer isn't going to first of all, a lawyer cannot simply take steps to change the person's ownership of that property without, you know, getting proper authorization from a bank or proper authorization from a mortgage, a broker on the one hand. But also on the other hand, you as a broker are that fraud mechanism check. So, you know, like you do way more than I would do. It's interesting because I don't need to do a ton. You know, the Law Society has some stringent ways in which we look at the specific piece of ID, but I know that you do way more. I'm not asking people for their pay stubs, for instance, or asking people for for, right? You've got to get pay stubs. You've got to get credit reports, which are, you know, going to have social insurance numbers attached to it. You're going to have, you're just going to get more detail on this person. It's just going to, based on the profile that you need to create in order to sell them to a bank.
Right.
Right. Whereas I don't have to sell them on anything. You know, I don't have to sell them to some other person.
Well, you're often verifying details that we've already collected.
Sure. I have to verify.
Right.
So in other words, I just got to look at it again.
Right.
So in other words, they've got to present what they presented to you, to me again, and then I've got to go through fraud mechanism checks. But honestly, that's where we can see that there's a gap. If we can get to the AI that says, well, I can just pass this in through a system.
Right.
We've got the automatic verification that it's okay, or that there hasn't been a flag for a stolen credit card, right? Or somebody said, you know, this person with this name has a stolen ID, or it's not stolen, but like a lost driver's license or something like that, right? I mean, I think, you know, I think it really...
That's all self-reported, by the way. So, like, you know, let's say you lost your wallet, and, you know, your wallet has so much, right?
Sure.
Has loads of information on you. If you want the fail-safe for your profile, right, then you have to call Equifax and TransUnion and actually put a warning on there. They'll do it for you. It's totally not a non-issue. But it's something that you have to initiate. So I think something that would be really interesting is if they made it mandatory. Like it just, as soon as, you know, you say your card was lost or stolen, then they flag it, you know, and depending on what it was, like if it was just a bank card or a credit card, maybe it just gets flagged for 6 months. Where if anyone tries to use your card for so much, or tries to open up a new card, then, you know, then there's a phone number they have to call that's yours specifically.
Yeah, it's always,
or, you know, stuff like that. There's ways that I think, you know, we can build on that, but I think there has to be more, because I just find it unbelievable that these people were able to get away with this.
I think banks always have that, you know, there's the balance between convenience and security, right?
Oh, 100%.
So like, you don't want to cancel. For instance, you know, I was on vacation in Florida recently, and my card wouldn't work at like Walmart, and I got on the phone and I said, hey, like, I got on the phone with the credit card company, and immediately, like as soon as I said, like, I'm on vacation, they switched modes into like, okay, you're on vacation. We cannot have that card not work. That's true, right? So, but again, there's a balance there. Maybe I'm on vacation, or maybe somebody's taken my card and has gone to Florida, right? But, you know,
did they verify?
They need to create. Yeah, so I did. They verified me, whatever. They asked the security questions, etc. There's nothing else you can do. They're not going to check my fingerprint, you know. But if somebody has that information, then they've got my card and they've got the info.
Credit cards are insured, and I find, because I've been through this myself, where I've had my wallet stolen and people racked up. They racked up a lot of money fast. I was in shock, like how quickly they worked their magic, I should say. But the credit card companies are completely insured, and it's one of those things, like, you know, just as long as they feel like you're telling the truth, you get your money back in like 24 hours.
Yeah.
And then their claim goes through, they get their money back. And so, you know, when it comes to credit cards specifically, it's almost like it's a victimless crime. And I tried reporting it to the cops, for example. Like, you know, they were like, yeah, cool, all right. Like, they're like, we don't have the resource, the energy. You got your money back. Criminals are going to do this. Like, it was just pretty much like, that's what I got back. Like, it was really,
which is why it's sort of,
file your report and like, thanks very much.
It's sort of the safest thing. Would you say? So, I mean, again, you know, sorry, I know we weren't planning on going down this path, but I just realized now I want to go down a path with credit cards, because I have questions about credit cards. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. So it is a good tool to be using when you're on vacation for that reason, because you've got insurance. For
sure, yeah, absolutely.
But then it could be a bad tool from a cash flow perspective, could it not?
Yeah. Well, you know what? I love collecting points. I think we all do. You know, I went on 2 vacations in the last 2 years with like using booking flights with points. So like they're handy, you know, and they have value because you're going to spend the money anyways. I think it's more the control of it, you know, and just setting up some behaviors. I think, you know, when you're dealing with your cash flow, one of the best things I've ever learned to do was like, okay, I'm going to swipe this. And by the time I get to my car, I've already moved some money over to the actual like card to pay for it.
So you're actually
let it accumulate.
You're taking money right away, transferring it onto your card. Man, most people don't do that.
Yeah, but you know, it's
right?
so easy. Like it's such you know, it's so easy in today's world. We all have apps for our banks, right, on our phone and all that. Like just log in. Quick transfer. I just spent $17.30 at Shoppers. Okay, cool. Pump that in. By the time like the person's done bagging it, like you can be done. Like hit approve, like, and it's already transferred over.
Sure.
You know, it'll take whatever the typical banking 24 hours to get posted and put in, right? But by the time the payment hits and your payment hits, like it's like neutralized, like you know, so it's paid for, right? And that's how you keep your credit card in check, is actually pay for things as you're actually buying them, right? Amazon is the worst.
Oh my,
right?
They make Amazon, it so easy.
Instant buy now, like buy box, like everything, everything to make it convenient for yourself. But even then, like if you're gonna buy something online, and I'm picking on Amazon, but they're all built that way, right?
Well, I don't know. Amazon is very.
Well, they're the king.
Click. Oh.
they're quick.
I just bought something. I didn't realize.
Like you just have to get in the habit of then saying, okay, well, I'll open the other app now, and I'll just pay for that now.
Yeah. I guess again, assuming, like, I think what happens as well, people do it and then they don't even have the money there. That's really where the problem starts to happen, right? Because you're like, well, I'll just pay for it later. I'm gonna get paid.
Well, that's why
I'm gonna get paid in 2 weeks.
You got to take inventory.
You know,
I find every week is such an important tool when managing your money and, you know, managing your cash flow to really and get more life out of it. Is you have to like make a routine. Like my routine's every Friday, right? I just sort of like log in. All right, what needs to get done? Make sure some bills got paid or they need to get paid. I post them. But I also look at, all right, well, you know, there was something I didn't account for here or we didn't account for. Okay, let me account for it now, right? Like that's how you stay on top of it.
Right.
Right? Because if you don't do that, and I've found this personally, if you don't do that, then over the next few weeks, it adds up.
For sure.
Right. Yeah. And you're not, and you're losing the habit. Right. So it's all about habit building, I think, and just making small adjustments without changing your life entirely is like really the key. And having that judgment call, like every time you feel like you're going down the rabbit hole, remind yourself of what that short-term goal is that you're itching to go on that vacation or, you know, buy a car, whatever it is that you're really leaning towards as a goal, that's really fun and really good for you. And like, you know, think of that, you know, make that the motivator to keep the habit going, because if you don't, then again, like you're just going to start cycling the wrong way and the world is against you. Like that's the thing, like Amazon, you know, and every retail store makes it so irresistible to buy things and part ways with your money. So it's not easy, you know, like no one's saying it is. These are just tips to make it easier so that you don't just end up mindlessly shopping, right? Like, you just sort of have these tools to help you. It's really key.
It's a bigger plan, right? Though, like, so you really have to have, because to keep you on the path, you have to know what that, first of all, you need to know what the path is. You have to know 100%. What your goals are. You have to understand what they are and really start to focus on them. It's pretty hard, right? If you don't have that, then you don't really see the reason why you shouldn't. Right?
Yeah,
I mean, there isn't really a reason why you shouldn't actually, right? Unless you build that goal in, because, you know, whatever, you could carry a balance on your cards and that would be really annoying if you really thought about it but if you have a goal to be wealthy, as an example, let's just say you have that's, you know, very broad goal, but imagine that's just the goal. I mean, even that on its own can very easily shift a mindset into, okay, This is about, I need wealth. So this is inconsistent with that for me to be spending on this car.
Yeah, for sure. You know, when it comes to keeping it going, like paying off my mortgage or paying off this loan or saving towards a retirement plan or an education fund or funding my insurance plan, like those are never going to be motivating enough. You know, I feel like that's the stuff that you put on autopilot once you have a good plan in place, right? So you're like, all right, now that I got this going on, I'm going to park this and achieve these broader long-term goals that are good for me. I'm going to be proud of that, but I'm going to let it happen in the background and make it work. But what keeps you going, you need something super appetizing, right? Like that's why focusing on short-term goals is so key, right? It's so key because you need something really fun, like, and paying off like a student debt isn't a short-term goal like that you want to focus on.
It's also not fun.
Yeah, like you need, because here's the thing, it needs to be awarding to yourself in a way that you really feel like, hey, I'm gonna do this again now, right? So, you know, imagine something really cool. Like I want to actually bring my wife for our anniversary to Costa Rica. I just have this vision in my mind. Like we're going to go to some jungle resort for like 5 days. Like, I don't know, it's going to be great. So, you know, like those are the things that's going to make you actually push forward and not be a victim to retail psychology. I mean, that's really what it is, right?
Sure.
You're just creating your own psychology and saying, okay, you know, I'm going to focus on bringing my wife to Costa Rica and having a great time, right? Like, and so that's what you're doing. You're combating what basically, you know, retail and big giant stores and organizations are trying to get you to part ways with your money as quick as possible. And it's not to say you shouldn't. It's just, you know, you just have what you mentioned, like a plan, something just sort of to follow. So if it's $400 or $800 a week that you can spend on amazing things like food, clothes, entertainment, you know, and keep you going from week to week, like that's great. Spend that money. It's just about not overdoing it. And so I find like keeping a short-term goal in mind, it will make those decisions sometimes that are challenging. Like it'll kind of snap you into a place a bit. Okay, noticing what I'm noticing. Like I kind of really want to buy this, but it's triggering like, okay, is this like, do I really need it right now? It'll make you stop, maybe see if you actually had the money there. Like, can I transfer that cash really quick now? Yes, great, go for it.
Sure.
Right, do it. No? Okay, well, then you start weighing out the pros and cons. Well, if I buy it now, can I put money towards that next week? Is it worthy? Like, you'll start making these decisions, and you'll keep your short-term goal in mind. And sometimes it's a hard no, you know? You're just like I'd stop myself from doing that. You know, I don't know how many times, right? I think I was telling you last.
You get better. Yeah, I don't know if it was here that we're talking about it, but I feel like you did mention that.
Yeah, like I was like buying sneakers, and I'm like, ooh, but look at these extra pair, man. You know, like look at this deal. Oh my gosh, it's like I don't need that extra pair though. Like I just came on here to buy the one pair, right? Like that's what I needed. Right now,
I totally failed in that regard when I was in Florida. Like even though it wasn't expensive, like it was the equivalent of, I don't know, $25 in Canadian for me to get an extra pair. But I just got the extra pair. I was like, I got the extra.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, the thing. You got to be compassionate to yourself, right? Like, don't worry about it.
That's the other thing. Is like you can be so hard. I get really hard on myself when I fail at this. I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah, and see
what was I doing? Like
that
why
discouragement
did I do that?
is really
and then you're
bad
really
on your psyche.
And then you get into like this vicious cycle of like,
of course,
man, I want to whatever. I'm just gonna buy like
exactly. Then you give up, right?
Forget
you
it.
mentally
buy 10 things now.
You just collapse on yourself, right? And that's the thing. It's like it's gonna happen. Don't worry about it. Like, you know, just move on, right? It's a new week. We'll fix that. That's how you keep things in check, right? That's why, like, oh man, I have a lingering balance of $1,000. Well, you could pick away at that. That's fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
As soon as it's like $5,000, $10,000, because you just don't check yourself. That's when you're like, okay, how long am I really going to take to pay it? Do I need now just to shift into a different plan that involves me consolidating this. So if you want to avoid needlessly refinancing and resetting your mortgage and other to consolidate all these other loans, then that's what it is, right? It's just every week just giving yourself a check, and you're going to have weeks you will overspend. You're like, all right, that's all right. We did that. Now it's like rebalance time, And I don't know how many times, me and my wife are like, okay, well, we kind of, we fell off. It's all good. Maybe we'll just spend a little less on stuff this week.
Is there a threshold you would say, like, I guess it's different for everyone, but is there a threshold for when you would say to someone, listen, I think it's probably better that you just refinance this right now? I think you've gone too far. And I think, you're probably you're going to be in a better shape. You're going to be in better shape if we just clean this up.
Yeah. You know what? It really will depend on how much income you have coming in and how much of that income you could divert to like actually paying something off.
So you could shift into a mindset of like, well, you know what? Actually, I'm just going to increase my income. What about that? What do you think about that?
Oh, hey, that's fantastic. I mean, if you have the ability to really do that, I think being both self-employed, maybe we can find ways to do that, but if you have a job, you have a salary, your hours you work, and that's really the limitation. If you're like, okay, are you going to put more time out there to make more money?
Yeah, like, are you going to go? Are you going to get a second job? Or are you
like I love that. Like I love that attitude. I think that's how you grow eventually, because that's how things aspire and you grow into the next thing. But at the same time, like, let's be honest, like most people aren't going to do that, right? Like they're going to just have to find a way to shift things around. So you were asking, like, is there a threshold? I would say, generally speaking, if people have no way of expanding income and they can't squeeze anything out of what they're currently earning, like they can't, let's say, shift from one, let's say I'm saving up for something, so I have some other plan that's going towards that. If I can't divert that and get something paid off within 3 to 6 months, then you should really start looking at consolidating that. And it may not be into
like you can't pay that
refinance.
If you can't pay that off in 3 to 6 months is what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Because the problem with credit card debt is that if you don't actively put dents into it, like it gets expensive, right?
Sure.
It's compounding every month at 18%. Like, I mean,
even if that dent is like a line of credit, right, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So what you could do, right, is you can try to, if you don't necessarily want to refinance it, your mortgage for that, you could unify the debt. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then you could focus now then on paying that off quickly.
Because you just have one thing to focus on.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So that helps a lot. And then usually that personal line of credit will be at a better rate than a credit card.
Sure.
So there's ways to look at it. There's methods of how you actually pay things off. You can, they have all different fancy names, but you can either focus on the one that costs the most. So for example, this one particular loan I have is $1,000 a month. Maybe the balance on it is something like $5,000.
Sure.
So you could have other debts that maybe cost you less a month to carry, but the balances are way huger. So like you would start focusing what can free up more cash flow so that you could compound it and now start paying all those other debts.
Right.
That's a method I tend to like a lot more because it just has a bigger effect overall. Right. of actually, growing your capacity to move forward. You could look at, a psychology around paying off the smallest debt first, saying it's done, and then building up on the higher balanced ones.
Yeah, that's actually, that's like, I remember I don't have student debt anymore, but I remember thinking like, shit, I'm never going to pay this student debt off.
Yeah, because like that big one is always going to be like a big mountain, right, to climb.
Yeah.
So if you could get over a couple foothills, then first basically, then you could start climbing up that mountain. There's a psychology around doing it that way that really helps people. At the end of the day, when you're in trouble when you have to use other debt to pay off that debt, right? Like, yeah. And because what eventually happens is that other avenue
is going to run out.
It's going to run out. You run out of runway. And now you're like, okay, now I got to do something like immediately because I only have like a month or two left.
Yeah.
Right. And so getting back to your original question, the threshold, it just really depends on everyone's personal circumstances, what tools they have to deal with the problem. But for the most part, the warning signs are if you are having to use like credit lines to pay off credit cards right away, you know, that's a good sign that you need to manage it.
And if you can't, like you should be getting that credit card down to 0 every time if you can. Like,
yeah, absolutely. Well, that's the thing, right? You want to keep it so that it's continuously moving down. You know, like we have credit card balances sometimes, right?
Sure.
Like it just happens. Like, you know, you go on vacation, but you start chipping away at it. So it's all about really kind of paying attention to it. So I think, you know, having that weekly session
and not being afraid to look. I also find like personally, that's more it, right? You're like, I don't know, I spend $1,000. I don't want to look at that right now. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so if you can get over it, it's just a way of shifting your brain because you can't get rid of it by not looking at it. That's
100%.
Right.
Exactly. And I think everyone's threshold has a lot to do with their emotional sort of balance when it comes to debt. Like, you know, how do they feel about money? You know, some people are just absolutely deathly afraid of holding any debt, right? So they don't use debt in any advantageous way. They get into a little bit of debt.
A lot of business people say this too. Like they're just like, no. I think I was listening to like really famous. Who was it recently? Somebody from Dragon's Den that was saying, or not Dragon. Is it Dragon? What's the other one in the U.S.? Shark Tank. Yeah. Someone from Mark Cuban. Mark Cuban was saying, you should never finance your debt. You should never finance your business, using debt. It should never be financed that way, which I find interesting because I'm pretty sure.
How do you scale? Right?
I'm pretty sure he had a bar that like he would have had to have financed using debt. There's just no way in which you can do like.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you could always. It just depends on how you what you're looking to achieve. I think debt is the.
Yeah, there's no hard and fast answer here.
Yeah, there's no hard or fast answer. I mean, like if you use debt properly, like there's a thing called good debt.
Sure.
When you buy a house, that's good debt.
Right.
Right. And then you could use more good debt and leverage to do other things. Start a business, basically buy assets that produce more income for you. Like there's all kinds of great things that can happen. But it's just a matter of functioning that in a way that makes sense.
Right.
If you're just buying stuff, you better have a means of paying that off quickly. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're just getting yourself in a position where you're going to have to start resetting.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with resetting because as soon as you reset, you create and open up more cash flow, then you start getting ahead.
Sure.
Right? So there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I help people all the time with this. Like we reset, we build out a new cash flow plan for them, and suddenly like a year later, right, the savings is going up, the mortgage is going down, you're marching forward, and you have a sense of pride because you kind of took control, and now you're kind of growing wealthier and happier, right? And the psychology around it is huge, right? So it's like the things like having short-term goals and like that really helps because you got a sense of pride when you get to go on vacation and you funded it and
and you're okay.
I've paid it off. I'm here and it's already paid for. Like things like that. Like
that is really nice. Good. Yeah, I would say it's interesting. I mean, we digressed really far down that.
Yeah, we did.
But that's really good.
I don't think we were going to talk about.
But that's really good. I mean, I think it's good. I think it was good what we were talking about there. I would say it is relevant though and related to home prices, right? So home prices are falling. So there's two things happening then, right? Again, Better Dwelling is saying that home prices are falling 40%. Whether you want to believe that, I don't know.
Yeah. I said on the record, Better Dwelling has always been a super bearish on like they're always pessimistic about the housing market. Always,
which is weird because I've
been following them for years. I follow them just for that purpose.
They're a blog about housing though, which I think.
Yeah, but if you ever read any of their articles, it's always like we're over leveraged. It's all coming to crash, and like it's constantly like even when when times are really good, you know, like
doom and gloom, man, doom and gloom.
That's doom and gloom. That's the thing. Like, I think, you know,
we'll make some probably doom and gloom, some clips out of this one. Like, you know what I mean? Just,
yeah, for sure.
It works.
Well, that's just it. So I was just going to say, you know, media's job is to get attention, and every even respectable newspapers or news stations, I guess, will always use the psychology of fear and to get attention, right? I find that's never going to go away. I just feel like them particular, like it's always, that's their game. They got it down to an art. People click and people consume. I mean, that's, you know, I don't, on the record, I don't think we're going to go down 40%. I think that's ludicrous. I really do. The one thing that's really interesting about this downturn in home prices in the housing market in general, because home sales are down by like 50%. So like the actual volume of people selling their homes is down a lot. And what people don't recognize is that typically when there's a downturn in prices, that brings out a whole new sense of FOMO, right? Like I better sell now before I lose too much. But what's happening now is that we're not seeing that big increase in supply, right? People aren't just listing frantically.
Yeah, that's not the reason for the downturn. It's not like there's so much supply that prices are falling.
Yeah, this is a very technical recession. This is or technical downturn. You know, we needed to get inflation under control. There was an expectation that this is going to happen. There's been an expectation told to us by the Bank of Canada and, like, you know, every economist that we're going to go through this. It's going to last a year. You know, hold on to your boots. So people are taking that. They're consuming that. They're like, okay, I'm going to ride this out.
Sure.
You know, and anyone that really is listing now is because they got a reason, like a real reason, you know. Death, divorce, health are typically the biggest ones. Or, you know, they have a need to leave, move. Like it's something structured that they can't change. Otherwise, no one would be listing right now. Like, why would you? Right?
Well, yeah. Yeah, you're right. It has to be these catastrophic circumstances usually, right?
I think affordability is growing as a topic. I think that's the biggest threat maybe right now to the housing market.
That's weird, eh?
Is affordability, because
I mean, that means that it's just sort of people, then that means the market is becoming more regular. So in other words, like it's not, we're not at a peak or a trough. We're just hitting a sort of what would be, you know, a healthy economy rather than a.
Well, I think that's what we're trying to return to eventually.
Yeah.
Like we still have to go through the landing.
It's difficult. I mean, if home prices falling, and because we know that they were inflated for a year and a bit, 2 years, definitely, probably longer, and now that the increase in interest rates, sure, that's slowed demand, and now we're seeing the decrease. But you're right about the supply, which I think is interesting, because that means, you know, we might be returning to a healthy state of the economy, is the way I see it, given that we don't have that supply, right? So if we don't have the supply and people aren't buying, so what is it that, you know, I suppose it's more dynamic than that, if you think about it, I guess, because it isn't just that because there's supply, people will buy. There's like, you know, there's other reasons why.
The vacuum is in the demand.
Yeah.
Right? Like supply has always been a tough issue in the GTA. That's why, you know, prices have always been evolving upwards. Mm-hmm. Right? And this will be just another blip. Like, don't kid yourself. Like, as soon as, you know, things get more affordable to get access to funds to buy,
coming back.
Prices will go up, and so will demand. They go in tandem, right? Interest rates go down, prices go up. So, like, that's on its way. Like, don't kid yourself. Like, if you have the ability to buy now at higher rates, do it, because you're gonna have a house in a couple years from now when rates are lower that will be worth more. Like you're getting a deal in the next 6 months to 12 months that I don't think we'll see for probably a few more years. And recessions are natural cycles in the business pattern too, as well, right? So we just got to keep that in mind. At some point, it was inevitable.
Sure.
You know, but this was very much a technical one, because, like, you know, COVID came around, so that was a disaster for the economy. I think we all understand the dynamics of that, right? We all lived through it. People literally couldn't work. So what do? They printed money, gave it away, and basically funded the economy for a bit so that everything didn't fall off a cliff. Well, that happened and rates stayed artificially very, very, very low. That created a huge amount of inflation. Home prices went through the roof. So now we're just basically taking that back a bit.
It's a rebound of what's
We're taking
on?
that because really what we were doing, we're born for the future, right?
Sure.
Like we created a future moment way too early, right? So now it's this rebalancing that's going to happen. But I would say the biggest threat right now is how long can certain people hold on?
Yeah, well,
right?
Variable mortgage rates.
Yeah, like I have a variable mortgage
I.
rate on one of my properties, and it doubled.
Yeah,
Right,
it's insane.
The actual mortgage payment has doubled.
That's insane.
Right, and so like we just found ways to absorb that, but the reality is that's what it is, right? You're creating a vacuum of money now going towards like maintaining just basic things like shelter and food, and you're taking it away from the rest of the economy. That's what their objective was. It was achieved, and I think that's what is now why there's a pause, right, on the interest rates. Is now it's the economy's turn to fully absorb all of that. Everyone's going to get accustomed to simply just not having much extra money. And that's what's going to create this this recession right now. And I think most people will hold on, but there are some people that will simply, be forced to sell. Like they're just not going to be able to hold on, right?
Well, people are not. Not everybody's going to have a job.
Yeah, well, that's
not
just
everybody's going
right?
to be healthy. Not everybody, right? And we've got a baby boomer generation that's aged out of the circumstances and are retiring and may be on the cusp of, right? I mean, we've had some clients like this where they're just on the cusp of being able to support themselves. And so you get enough of that kind of people, those kinds of people down the pipe in the circumstances, and you could see something ugly. Hopefully that doesn't, I don't know. We're not seeing that happening. There's not a ton of defaults.
I haven't seen it yet, but
there's no defaults or anything like that. I mean,
no, defaults are at their best they've ever been, by the way.
So a very low default rate right now.
Our default rate's the best it's ever been. People are really trying to shift their lifestyle to make ends meet. And people can do that for a while, right? And so like this plan has to work, it really does. And I think it will. Like I really do. I mean, every major economist is calling for a mild to moderate recession to happen right through this year, and we can start seeing rates, the Bank of Canada rates, start coming down within 12 months. So, I mean, we really have everyone on the same page. I mean, I think us as consumers are buying that as well. We're like, okay, just hold on, and that's key. Just hold on.
And how much do you? It's really tricky with economists, right? I mean, how much of what they're saying is clickbait? How much of what they're saying is real, right? I mean, we don't actually have numbers for the current state of default. I guess we have some numbers, but we don't have polls on the current state of default, like right now. We'll see those polls in 6 months.
That'll be everything's always like in retrospect by either a month or 90 days, 6 months, a year, right? Even employment numbers, right? That's a lagging indicator.
Sure.
Inflation is a lagging indicator. So that's why all the inflation news last year, we just saw these constant increases, and you think to yourself, well, why isn't it getting better? Because it actually takes about 12 to 18 months for the economy itself, like, on the streets, to actually absorb that increase.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that's us, the people, now dealing with that in real time, right?
Yeah.
It takes that long for us to actually manage that. And so that's what this year is about, right? Inflation is going to come down, right? And that's what will stir, rates coming down. The recession will be what the consequence is. And again, to get us on a growth pattern, they'll probably decrease rates. You're asking about clickbait economists. I think economists run certain models, and they try to inform us of what the most likely model will work, right? That's what economists do. And what I mean by models, they try to forecast all these different inputs and say, okay, this is what likely will happen now because, you know, we are raising rates, and housing supply is where it is, and so they project, right? It's just like the weather, if the weatherman says it's going to rain on Saturday, like the likelihood is, it might be overcast, it might rain, it might be really bad, or it might be, a little sprinkle, right?
A little sprinkle of this inflation here and there,
like you just have to kind of appreciate that. I think there's a big distinction between, the news and then the economists. Like the news is trying to wrap up what they're saying and putting an interpretation to that.
And they're doing it in very short sound bites.
Exactly. That's the world we live in.
Actually.
Yeah, exactly. So like Better Dwelling, I'm gonna wrap on them again because they're notorious for wrapping information and really being super pessimistic and very bearish on the real estate and housing market. They're absolutely notorious for it. So
just say it. You don't think you don't know if they're telling the truth here. That's really what
I've read, like what the great thing is, if you have the interest in, is actually going to the source, right? Like, if, for example, let's say you bank with BMO, like tap into what BMO's economist is saying, it's on their website.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Because what's going to happen is a guy from, or a journalist from, Better Dwelling will take that information, just spin it to you, and then you'll just find it on your feed, right? If you so let it be, But the thing is, you should go see what they're saying, right? And just same thing with what the Bank of Canada and their announcements. They have, it's not just an announcement, right? Like they have a whole speech, and they allude to what they're thinking and what they're projecting. And so it's the same idea, like try to read into what they're saying. That's probably your best bet. I think we all know that. But of course that's difficult to do because that takes a bunch of time, and
sure.
And there's a reason why, TikTok is super popular, because it's like 60 seconds, and you get to absorb some information and then you move on. Right. So, I think, it's always gonna be a balance. So, Don't ever believe anything that's overly optimistic or pessimistic, because usually the truth is somewhere in the middle.
That's true,
right?
Yeah. It's like standard knowledge.
Standard knowledge, right?
I think like TikTok has opened that world up in an interesting way, because you also could get into, you can really go down deep into things because of what you see on TikTok. Like you can get
it opens the gate.
It really does. It's a cool gate opener, but that's what people need to understand. Is it's just opening the gate. It's not telling you all of the information. It's not saying that this is the full picture of what's going on. It's a gateway into something, and really you need to start to take steps to get down that rabbit hole. The great thing about it is now you can go down a rabbit hole. Like you could very easily.
Absolutely.
You could spend your Friday night just like, I want to know
research.
about. Yeah, I'll just I'll look. I'll just check out. Economists in the United States and what they anticipate will happen in 2023, and you'll get, I don't know, who knows, you'll be on a lecture for Harvard, you'll be on you'll see a TikTok, and then you'll see, I'll just who was that guy? Did he give a lecture on something? And then you end up watching a lecture for an hour and a half, and now you're down this rabbit hole. You don't know what, and that's great. And the problem is it sort of puts it back onto, so, we used to be watching the news and let's gauge our expectations and our knowledge based on what we see in the news. Rarely, or it was a lot harder to be able to go down that rabbit hole any deeper. And we're sort of in a place where you can do it easier, but that means now it's put it on you to do it easier because there's just so much information.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're right. You're right. It's never been a better time in the history of the world to be informed. It's just, there's so much information, but part of the problem is, you have to filter it, and I think journalism has taken a turn to where it needs to catch up with that culture of getting your attention. And so it's lost a lot of credibility,
Yeah.
It just has, right? Like you could see that, you see it in the States all the time, right? CNN versus Fox, right? And they're just like these two polar opposites. of their agendas and how they reach people based on demographic and political pull. Like it's crazy, like how blatant it is. It's almost like
we don't have that here as much.
We do, but it's not. It's definitely way more passive.
Sure.
Than it is the alpha aggressiveness that it is in the States. Like they really, and so like like it just, there's no Walter Cronkites anymore. Like it's just like you can't, like you can't really put your faith in what you're hearing, and the emphasis is on you to actually be someone that actually takes the time to learn it. Or you just avoid it. I got to be honest with you. Like
you think so?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent. Like I hate watching the news.
I don't watch the news, but I just mean avoiding going down a path or looking into something. I mean, I feel like,
well, only if you want to know. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I think it's like, I think it's a generational thing again, like you're saying.
Yeah.
That I mean, I think my parents still watch the news. Like they're watching
for sure, 100%.
They trust what they see there. They see it as like, oh, credible piece of information, and that's the view that's sort of challenged. I feel like we're gonna like this can be like a very like we can go down.
Yeah, we can talk about this
on its own about this whole thing. But
for sure.
I think about my own parents there, and they're just, they see that as far as they're concerned, the most relevant news they hear is whatever's on CP24.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not. I don't think they're in the minority. I think that's very common for
absolutely.
that generation, right? That was the way in which they received news, but it's like the whole infrastructure has changed. So if you want to know the answer, you can dig
sure.
deep and you got to figure it out.
And the thing is, it also appeases the education system. How many people, especially of younger generations in Canada, are now have post-secondary education. So like it's a whole, paradigm shift, not just because of technology, but just the people have the capacity to take the time to research it,
sure,
and formulate some sort of, answer. And, the truth is, like for me, I try to take interest in things that I want to be interested in. And that's a nice thing about it now too, is that there's so much that you could just sit there and be like, okay, this was, so I don't watch the news, unless I happen to hear about something that I'm curious about.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, we kind of search out what we want to learn more about. That's why you should tune into Cash in Common if you are interested in, learning
sure.
more about,
That's a great thing about this format, though.
Relevant.
Exactly. We can go down a path and we're going to get people on here that I think we'll pick and choose even from some of the stuff that we have here. It'd be kind of nice to have a securities expert on here or somebody who could tell us about
absolutely
what fraud is.
Well,
really
we're definitely going to have
about,
more guests.
And I think we'll do that as we go forward, but we'll probably wrap it up today. I didn't, we there are a lot of things we planned to talk about. We didn't touch on them, but I would say that's the nature of the game. We get down a path and it takes us pretty far. I think that's why this is going to be great. I'm so excited for the rest.
I think what I'm excited for, because we talked about guests, but we're going to also, I think, do a real conversation around health and mindset and wealth. And we can probably share our own personal experiences and some of our own knowledge on that, and it'd be interesting to get feedback from others and see what they think about that. But I think there's a real pattern that can happen in your life when your mindset and your health are aligned. Wealth almost comes naturally, It sort of kind of circles together. So anyways, I'm looking forward to that one.
That's going to be great. I'm excited about it. Right, we can talk deep about that perspective and how that actually shifts your ability to build wealth.
That one's gonna get personal.
That's gonna get personal. Well, we'll get personal next time. But thanks so much, guys, for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks.